I move to approve the minutes for the January 13, 2020 regular board meeting.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions on these? I had a couple just typos, little things, but I can give you those.
Okay.
There's nothing, I don't think there was anything significant. Oh, there was actually one thing. We did adjourn to closed session, and it says we did it to discuss the purchase or lease of real property. But I believe that was actually to discuss employee. So I think that wrong statute was listed there for that. That's on it's on the last page of those.
Yep, that's it.
And then also under the adjournment, it says we adjourned the regular meeting at 7:54, but I believe that was when we went into closed session. So I don't know the exact time of what the meeting ended, but it was much later than 7:54. So, okay. Those are my only corrections, other than some typos.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Abbott.
Yes.
Commissioner Murdoch.
Yes.
Commissioner Schisler.
Yes.
Commissioner Goebel.
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you very much. Next up is communications and correspondence. I don't believe there was any in this packet. Commissioner Abbott had forwarded us an email that he mentioned last time regarding the tax levy, but I don't remember seeing anything else that was included.
Ron Deger?
Yeah, exactly. And he provided a lovely response.
Yes.
So that was very nice of him.
So that was all I remember seeing. Is there any other communications or correspondence?
Nope.
Okay. Next up on our agenda is recognition of visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address us this evening? All right. Hearing no one, we will move forward to approval of the voucher list.
All right, I move to approve the voucher list in the amount of $1,511,745.15, a copy of which is to be attached to and become a permanent part of the minutes of this meeting.
And I second.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on the voucher list?
I had some minor ones, Steve. I'm sure we'll answer those later.
We will.
Okay. Yeah, I had a couple minor ones too. Nothing major. Any other comments or questions? May we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Abbott.
Yes.
Commissioner Murdoch.
Yes.
Commissioner Schisler.
Yes.
Commissioner Goebel.
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf.
Yes.
Voucher list is approved.
Thank you very much. Next up is our Executive Director's Report.
Thank you. Want to announce here in this meeting, even though I told all of you via email, that starting next week on February 20th, Christy Solberg will be on her first day of work here at the Wilmette Park District as our Superintendent of Parks and Planning. She comes to us from the Park Ridge Park District, where she's currently the Assistant Superintendent of Buildings and Grounds. She has a great set of experience behind her, growing up through the ranks of all the different positions in a Parks Department, and we look forward to everything she can bring to our agency and help us propel ourselves forward. Also, in our other department head vacancy news, we have begun interviews for our Superintendent of Finance positions, and we have final interviews this week, and we hope to have someone selected and on board here in the next handful of weeks. So we're moving forward on both those positions. Tuesday, February 5th was start of our camp registration, 9 a.m. for residents. As typical, the first 30 to 40 minutes are the busy time. We did 957 transactions, 97% of those taking place online. And the enrollments just keep on coming in. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., non-resident registration will begin. In your packet going forward, the Lakefront Committee has a shoreline protection agreement for your approval. It is an agreement that was provided to us by Smith Group that the Lakefront Committee reviewed, provided some feedback, and Smith Group made revisions according to that feedback, and it's here for your approval tonight so we can begin the work of looking at all of our shoreline parks and how to best fortify them against the higher lake levels. To that end, as you all know, back a while back, I think in January, maybe the 11th, there was some pretty heavy winds off the lake for an extended period of time, which caused a lot of onshore wave action damage. throughout Chicago and all of the lakefront, and Chicago began a process of a claim with the Illinois Emergency Management Agency and fell short of certain thresholds, so asked all of the other agencies to participate in the claim. We all put together numbers of the damage we sustained. Those numbers range widely depending on your community, depending on what you had built into the water. Our number was not very large, $35,000 to $40,000. Last week on the first conference call, it was actually very exciting because there was some talk of this coverage covering, say, the engineering costs related to this plan, as well as short-term and long-term fixes. As of this morning's conference call, though, those have been taken off the table. That doesn't mean that they won't get put back on, but at this point, it doesn't look like those aren't, that those types of costs will be included in the coverage. But wanted to bring that up to everyone up to speed on that, because I know people have been hearing things in the media about that. Also in your packet, you have the stormwater intergovernmental agreement, as well as some visual aids for the community playfields reservoir design. You also have printed out in front of you those designs if you don't want to work off of your iPad. I can give a little bit of an update now, and when we get to that topic on the agenda, maybe a little bit more, but the history of this is the IGA was created initially by our legal counsel using the West Park Intergovernmental Agreement as the base document, and included in it the requests for consideration for use of the parks that this group determined, and the village has reviewed it, made some very minor changes to some of the language, and the back and forth continued all the way through Friday afternoon before we put it in there. So this is definitely not a final document. This is not a document that anyone is asking anyone on this board to take any actions or make any motions or take any votes on tonight, other than to have it in the public purview, have you have the ability to make comment on it tonight. The items we requested, they had their engineers put cost estimates and solutions to it. Our engineers are now reviewing those cost estimates and solutions to verify that they're acceptable and that they're accurate. Similarly, these designs, as you can see, there are mini manholes and catch basins that are included at grade level that will impact our ability to use the playfields as playfields, and therefore our engineers, again, are working with the village's engineers to make alterations to these plans to move the catch basins and manholes either completely out to the perimeter where we wouldn't be laying fields, or subsurface, but while still maintaining the integrity of the design, because those manholes and catch basins are designed not for the stormwater tank itself, because that's bringing water in from surrounding areas. Those are there to solve our own park site drainage issues. So we don't want to lose them completely. We want the effectiveness to be there. We just don't want them to keep us from using the playfields for its intended purposes. So again, these are not final drawings. Similar to the IGA, everything is fluid at this point. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Director Wilson?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We'll move along to committee reports then. First up, we have the Lakefront Committee.
It was a busy week for the Lakefront Committee. Not only was there a meeting last week, but there was a Committee of the Whole meeting, which I think I'll go ahead and make address that as well. The Committee of the Whole meeting, it took place on January 29th, since that took place before the last Monday's Lakefront meeting. Let's talk about that. The board met to, in consideration of both the erosion that's taking place in the Lakefront and the master plan initiatives. We discussed the scope of well, we don't really know the scope of a shoreline erosion project, if there is one, but we did talk about the master plan, and a lot of it, again, the board is more or less narrowing in on. This was the community-wide survey that was done 45 years ago, and narrowing in on the things that came in very high, such as roads and sewers and walkway paths and landscaping. So keeping our master planning scope relatively narrow. things that aren't necessarily, at least this board has come to the conclusion, that aren't in a master plan, but are in, and will be addressed in capital budgets, and in fact, there are future capital budgets with line items for these, would be things like Lakeview Center and sailing. So it's not that they won't be done, it's simply that they're not in the scope of this particular master plan. They will be handled as separate projects. And if I'm saying anything wrong, and I got that meeting wrong, just let me know. I'll give you a chance in a minute. With regard to shoreline erosion, there's obviously a great deal of concerns. When this committee started out in May, after the last round of elections, we asked that we start to address and perhaps hire a shoreline consultant. We are now at that point of hiring, and there is a contract which you've seen in here that we will recommend. The last 6 months have only just emphasized the need for this study to take place to see what our options may be. The contract calls for up to 4 plans, alternative plans with cost estimates that would be provided to us, and benefits and detriments to each one of these plans. So none of us here. Actually, the gentleman is here, Mark Wagstaff is here from Smith Group and can answer any questions that this board might wish to put to him that weren't there to talk to him before. And so, it's a chance to study what we can do, what's possible, what these things might cost. And therefore, I know the committee was going to make a recommendation that we move forward. And I'll get to that when I'm done with my report. So other than that, the staff is gearing up for the 2020 season, taking into consideration these erosion challenges that are taking place down at the lakefront. We've had some heavy storms, and we've had some trees that have been impacted. We have not suffered much of any kind of property damage, but it is concerning to us. We have been through, just to refresh our memories, and the staff has reminded us of this, we've been through this level of erosion before in 1985 when the shore came up near to the sidewalk, and there is now being exposed sheet piling protections and various boulder protections that are now being exposed. These are our line of defense. But Mother Nature is Mother Nature. They can make fools of us all. And so it will be undoubtedly be a different lakefront this summer, but no less, the appreciation we might show for our lake and our lakefront may be no less than it ever was. It might even be heightened. So anyway, are there any questions before I get to the shoreline agreement about what I said or missaid, or anything anybody would like to add? I have something. So we did talk about whether or not was it prudent to go ahead and do a master plan, or wait for the entire shoreline erosion consultant to finish their work. The shoreline erosion consultant will get started first, but by and large they will run concurrently. And there was considerable questioning of the wisdom of that, but I think the consensus of the board was to go ahead and move forward now with the shoreline consultant, and soon the Lakefront Committee will make a recommendation for a master plan designer, but we're not ready at this point. So I'm sorry. Now, are there any comments that anybody would like to make before I make a motion? Any questions? He's right here.
I have one question. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll to my thing. There was one section that talked about soil samples. I think it was up to 10 or grain size analysis, sorry.
Yeah.
And it has a TBD as far as cost on that. I'm just wondering if we have any kind of range or any notion of what that we're looking at as far as cost on that.
Steve?
I'm sorry, it's page
I'm seeing page
4,
four,
under page 4, under lab consultant for grain size analysis, 10
Yeah,
samples
it's not
maximum.
much. I believe actually this was outlined as a line item in the reimbursable expenses in the original version, and we asked them to move that into the baseline
Okay.
price, so that's why the initial price from the version in which the Lakefront Committee looked at went from $49,500 to $52.50, so it's $750, and the reimbursable number dropped from $1,500 to $750 because we just moved it in and
Gotcha.
said, let's just call it part of the
So
study.
it actually is part
So-
of the scope.
Yeah.
So this to be determined is incorrect then on here? Right here.
Yes, I see that. Yes, it sounds like that's the plan. We're going to do it, right?
Yep. Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to get hit with some like big fee down the road then when they're like, oh, it's TBD.
Nope.
The grain size affected the erosion, the speed with which erosion takes place.
Okay.
So,
That was my only question.
any other questions? Then I'm going to make a motion. That's what we do. I move to approve the professional services agreement for a shoreline protection study with the Smith Group in the amount of $50,250 as reviewed by the Lakefront Committee.
I'll second.
Are there any comments or questions? Hearing none, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Abbott?
Yes.
Commissioner Murdoch?
Yes.
Commissioner Schisler?
Yes.
Commissioner Goebel?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf?
Yes.
The agreement is approved.
Thank you very much. Anything else for the Lakefront Committee? Brian? Anything else?
Oh, no. No, staffing, I mean, they're mostly staffed, right?
Yes.
Like 80% or something. It's a popular place to be. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. We'll move along to Parks and Recreation Committee.
The Parks and Recreation Committee met earlier this evening, and in keeping with what we started last month, we did a deeper dive into the fitness center this month. Last month, we looked at the pool, and staff gave us a great overview of the fitness program as it is now, talked a little bit about enhancements we might consider as we look at refurbishing the community recreation center. If everybody recalls, we allocated some funds to do some design work for that, and there would be potentially some design changes. We reviewed the recent history of the fitness center in terms of memberships and revenues and the staff, and it was a great report. So I learned a lot, so thank you very much, Emily, and to Jeff and to the entire staff who put it together. Thank you much. In addition, we talked about, staff gave an update on a number of subjects, including ice. We have the Northern Illinois playoffs coming up in the next week and next couple of weeks. There's a 10U and a 14U tournament, I think, in the coming week, and a 12U tournament the week after that. We had 115 community members who tried hockey for free recently, and apparently we have some future hockey players, maybe some future Blackhawks who got their first taste of hockey. So very exciting. And they're gearing up for the ice show, which will be in May. As Steve had mentioned, camp registration has been going on for the past week, and non-resident camp registration starts tomorrow. So all you residents who are watching and listening, get in now while the best spots are available. There will be a job fair on February 29th for folks who are interested in working for the Park District this summer. And on January 31st, I believe, we had our daddy-daughter dance at the Michigan Shores Club. We had 150 couples, and I hear from someone who might have been in attendance that a good time was had by all. Is that correct, Todd?
Very much so.
Good stuff. Paddle tennis announced that they will be having, at least on the men's side, member guest events on March 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And then they have a club championship planned for April after the end of the competition season. And gymnastics is in the process of finalizing a hire. And I would like to point out that several of our gymnasts competed in the Central Suburban League, former gymnasts competed in the Central Suburban League South Championships, and apparently several of them did very well, including, no coincidence, my niece Maeve Murdoch, who won the overall all-around competition. So congratulations to Maeve and all the New Trier gymnasts who competed so well. And that's the Parks and Recreation report.
Thank you. Any questions for Parks and Rec? Thank you very much. We'll move along to the Golf Operations Committee.
Yes, the Golf Operations Committee met last week. Staff recently upgraded software that will run the scheduling and tee times as well as the restaurant, so they're very excited about what that will bring. Additionally, as part of summer camp enrollments, deposits and payments are up almost 15% versus last year, so they credit that in part to the programming that is was built last summer and continues this year. One of the major projects in our capital improvement plan is the golf cart path program, and the plans have been shipped from the architect to the engineers to continue development. We expect we'll be going to bid later this spring. And lastly, it's hard to believe, but later, at the next board meeting, I'll share an update on March, and the golf course will open in March. So while it feels like a long way off on a day like today, there are some stalwart golfers that are going to be out there in just a few weeks. The range is open if anyone needs practice in the meantime. And that's it for the golf committee.
Thank you. Any questions for the golf committee? Crazy that's going to be open soon.
Hard to believe.
I know.
Thank you very much. Next up is Financial Planning and Policy Committee.
Okay, the Financial Planning and Policy Committee met on Monday, January 27th. A couple areas we touched on. One in the unfinished business area was the compensation study. We asked a bunch of follow-up questions. Each position within the Park District has been graded. There's been meetings held with the managers and all the individuals about the program. For salaries that are outside of the ranges that came in the comp study, those are being handled on sort of a case-by-case basis. And we're still, we've asked for and are waiting, I think, unless it's come in the last week or two, the final report. And one of the things that'll be in that is their recommendation as to how much to increase the ranges every year, or what methodology we'll use to do that, because we're not going to do a compensation study every year. So that was that area. The other thing was we looked at the audit proposals. We reviewed 3 different firms, including the incumbent, who had the best proposal in terms of both hours and fees. There was some discussion around the benefits of changing firms and getting a different set of eyes on the books. The general feeling was that because we have the open finance superintendent position, this would probably not be a good time to make a change of auditors as well. And so it would be sort of an unnecessary disruption at an inopportune time. So our recommendation was to pursue with the incumbent. And then finally, I will be involved on Wednesday interviewing the 2 final candidates for the finance superintendent position. Steve invited me to join him. So,
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the Financial Planning and Policy Committee? Thank you very much. We'll move along to unfinished business. There's nothing on our agenda this evening. Does anyone have any unfinished business before the board? Hearing none, we'll move forward with new business. Under new business, we have a review and discussion of the intergovernmental agreement with the Village of Wilmette and the design document for the community playfield reservoir. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Wilson to kind of give us he touched on the...
Sure. Yeah, I said more than I thought I was going to say, so I don't have a lot more to add to it, but I did think of a couple things I didn't say that I should have. So, in particular, the much of this agreement, as is with any agreement, is around responsibilities and liability and who's going to do what when and who has what rights. As I said, almost all of that mirrors the West Park agreement, and which is why I believe the initial feedback from the village has been very positive, because it's no different than a prior agreement that they've already agreed to once. So what's really specific and unique to this agreement is 6.7 of this agreement, which is where we ask for park improvements, and so that's really the value we're asking for in return for access to the land. That's the consideration paid, and that's what I mentioned earlier, that the Village of Wilmette has asked their engineers to help estimate the cost of that, and that our engineers are looking at how they did those estimations based on what, and are the estimates good. So once we have a better feeling for the number and the range of costs, we'll be able to have more direct conversation. But at this point, the feedback from the village staff after communication with their elected officials has been positive, even on section 6.7. And then lastly, this design here, again, you have it, and it is problematic, as it does hurt our ability to use the playfields as playfields. But again, our engineers are working with the engineers from Baxter Woodman, who created this design, to make this a much better solution for us long term. Have at it.
I'll open it up to commissioners if they'd like to give their thoughts and any questions.
I assume we'll go through the IGA first and then go through the drawing
We can
second.
do
Does
that.
that make
Yep,
sense?
we can definitely do that.
So with respect to the IGA, and again, focusing on section 6.7, just a clarification, and perhaps we need to talk with the village more, but 6.7B talks about community playfields drainage both in the construction zone and then beyond the construction zone. And in the area beyond the construction zone, talks about allocating up to $1.2 million for drainage improvements. I guess I would like to know what those improvements will be and verify that those improvements will be comprehensive such that we will be able to improve drainage throughout the entirety of the park.
Yes, so let me clarify that point. The 1.2 that you're seeing in there is for that additional tank that we requested them to put in.
Got it.
To handle the surface detention that exists currently. So that farthest right
thank
square
you. Okay,
on the
got
tank.
it.
So that's what the value of that is.
Okay.
The value for the drainage for the rest of the park is what we're
Working on
looking
now.
at, what
Got
solution
it.
they use to create their own internal estimates. To describe for everyone the process, our parks foreman and I sat down and did an overhead and marked out the areas where we have standing water throughout and provided that to the village to then use as their basis for cost estimate. And our engineers will use similar overheads, but they also have come out during and right after rain events and taken drone footage to confirm where our issues are. So they'll be able to add that value to it.
Great.
But there is no dollar amount for that in
I
here.
understand. But we are looking to improve drainage throughout the park and not just in the construction area.
Correct.
To clarify. Great. And then with 6.7D, there's a reference to bathrooms at both the community playfields and at Thornwood Park. And just to clarify, I don't believe this board has taken any action on bathrooms at either of those locations at this point, other than to say that we want to look at them. Ultimately, even though these bathrooms are in this agreement, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will have bathrooms at both of those parks. But it's that they're providing funding if we decide that we want them. Is that correct?
I had thought we had agreed on.
I thought we had agreed as well. I was under the impression that,
So we agreed to make the request of the village.
Correct. I just want to clarify that.
We've taken no vote on that.
Correct.
And
So we-
nor have we really undergone a public,
Correct.
yeah,
this IGA, which is now in a public document, is the first real opportunity for the public to actually see that we are asking for this. So now it starts. So I can't say that we've agreed to anything, except to study this and to ask the public for their input.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we agreed to include it as a request as a part of the IGA. I think it's also safe to say that there's been no vote to say yay or nay to one, both, or none of the locations. And that's where kind of it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg.
I just wanted to clarify that at this point, that obviously we'll have further conversations about
Yes.
both those locations and decide how to proceed with them.
We
That's
did
all.
not
Very
ask
good.
for one at Hibbert Park.
We did not ask for funding at Hibbert Park, correct?
So
Right.
certainly that, to me, was sort of our direction. No. Okay.
and the way this works, the way that this is being structured is that the village will tell us the value of these things, and then we'll cut us checks based on our implementing these items. So if it's something that down the road we don't do, it's not something that they're going to obviously give us the money for. So it's not like we're wasting taxpayer dollars.
Right, and so it's very similar to what we did with West Park previously with the turf, which worked out great for everybody, I thought.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Very good. Those were my comments on 6.7.
I have comments, but
Go ahead.
picking up off of what Mike says, I know I'm getting in the weeds here, but I am kind of interested with regard to our storage at the community playfields, the tank that has been designed for.
Can you let us know which number you're, or where, what page or number?
Okay,
or-
so, where Mike had talked about in 6.7B, which was the, talked about our storage at Community Playfield. And there was, Steve explained that there's this small tank here.
Right.
That's basically, that's the park district's, not to address the community stormwater issue, but to address our particular flooding issue. and I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but I'm kind of interested in the acre feet and the storage capacity of that versus their calculations as to how many acre feet we get in a 10-year rainfall.
If I could just jump in on that, Steve, my understanding is it's not to address our flooding within the park, it's to
Correct.
address the detention that
Yes.
was handled overland for the High Crest addition in the past.
Exactly.
So it's whatever size it is, it's not that it's irrelevant per se, but it's the size that MWRD has required us to handle underground to allow us not to handle it overground. Is that correct? Correct.
Well, but that's the nature of my question. So not only does, we currently have stormwater detention, not retention, in the community playfields to handle high crest, but we also feel that we have drainage issues, which has been on a budget for a long, long time. Over and above, if I may, you can correct me, over and above the issues of the high crest detention area, we still feel that we have drainage issues at the community playfields. So I realize, again, I'm getting in the weeds here, into the details, but I'm kind of curious as to, by those numbers, I can start to divine not only how much is given over to the High Crest for its detention, that's code-required detention for High Crest, and how much might be then set aside to handle our drainage issues. Now, whether or not I actually get the acre feet number, I'd like some sort of explanation of what the problem is that they're trying to solve. And just asking as, oversight.
Yep, happy to ask the question, happy to have both their engineers or our engineers answer that question. But again, specific to that vault,
Yes.
it's designed to meet the requirements of the MWRD permit as the same as the overland detention that was there, or that's there right now. Any other drainage throughout the park is not to be achieved by that tank. That would be achieved through other means, which is what they're estimating and developing right now.
So, again, not trying to design their system. There certainly was this board's, and again, I'm not trying to whoa, they're not doing their job. They probably are. We had a request to help us manage our
Yep.
flooding issues of our fields here.
Correct.
So,
And that's being
I'm
handled
curious.
outside of that tank. is what I'm
Outside of
saying.
that tank, so
Correct.
how is it being handled? I can't see that on the drawings.
It's not on the drawings, that's why. So it's being developed, because that was part of our request in the IGA. So they've developed cost estimates based on a concept of how they're going to handle it, and that's what our engineers are looking at, reviewing, confirming, and re-estimating the cost of. So as they're developed, of course, those are going to come forward.
So, yes, so I'm asking the question so
Yep.
that the question might be answered.
Yep,
Okay.
I'm with you.
I have others. All right, going back to the agreement, going to earlier in the agreement. Give me a minute to get there. I don't, this is page 4 of 27 of the agreement. Term of temporary construction easement, there's the term temporary, but that's for construction easement. Item number 4 on page 4 of 27, grant of non-exclusive perpetual agreement. Now,
Easement.
easement. What did I say? Agreement? Yeah, happens all the time. Can't speak. So, again, when the original, there was a memo of understanding that this board discussed, and we took out of that, not to say that we voted on it, we simply took out the word perpetual easement in the memorandum of understanding, with the idea that, if I may, I believe that we would debate the issue more thoroughly at another date. Would that be... In other words, I'm not saying this board decided whether or not it was going to be a permanent easement or a limited time easement, but I think the time has come for us to have that discussion. I don't see anywhere in here that this is a limited or has a time cap on the easement. I would like to raise the question. I would argue that it should be. We can, whether or not we debate this tonight, we debate this at another time, I think that question is open, and I would like this agreement to represent whatever this board eventually decides.
Can I make a statement to that? I believe it's my understanding that if we have some sort of timeline on the easement, at the end of that time, then we are responsible for the tanks, everything that's there once it expires.
That's actually not the way I read it. What I read is that they're responsible for removal of the tanks at such time the tanks are no longer needed. That comes later. I'll address that as well. I have some comments about that. But
It was my understanding that having a time, if those 99 years come up or whatever the time might be, then it reverts back to the park district's.
Brian, what we can
I
do is
didn't read that.
we'll have our attorney write an opinion for you on the matter. They've addressed it to me, and
Okay.
and that's basically my understanding as well. Both our attorney as well as the village's attorney shared in this opinion that we would open ourselves up to ownership of those tanks if there's a time frame on it, and I don't think we want to have that.
well, I'm sort of an engineer. I'll claim some, but I'm not a lawyer. So, but I'm also a commissioner. So I'd like to get their opinion and then pass it through.
Happy to get you the legal opinion. Yep.
And we'll hold that discussion after that. On page 5 of 27, item number 6.1, this is review and approval of project plans. This, I have a few issues. One, the board is not specifically addressed in here as the body that is approving these drawings. And it may seem like a minor point, but the board is the park district, and the board is accountable to the citizens. And there's a 30-day, which may or may not be enough time for review of, not clear what drawings they are. There are specific steps in the design process of schematic design, design development, and CDs, and I would like to see a review of those steps as we go, and I'd like to see the board as the body who is providing approval. And the reason for that, again, we are accountable. If the board is reviewing it, then the community has an opportunity to review it. It is a public process. And so, whether or not this matters to my fellow commissioners or not, it matters to me. So we can talk about it, or I'm simply stating my opinion here. I didn't see moving on, I didn't see anything in here about restoration of fields, how they would be restored, whether or not it's grass seed or turf. There was talk in here about landscaping plans, and I'm happy to see that. That's a significant cost impact. If the fields would be restored, say, with turf and be brought back quickly, that is not an inconsequential cost, and probably we should discuss that and decide, if we are in agreement with how the fields will, and how quickly the fields can be restored. Moving on to page 8 and 9, as Commissioner Wilson, not Commissioner, I'm sorry, Executive Director Wilson talked about, that 6.7, starting on page 7 and going through page 8 and 9, are park improvements. How are we, as a board, and hence to our community, going to discuss, I don't expect an answer right here, how are we going to have this community discussion about public restrooms? There's an irrigation system being, we are asking for community playfields and at Thornwood Park, and we are, in this agreement, asking for a recreational fitness path, including outdoor fitness equipment and low ground lighting around the perimeter of community playfields. Again, this is the first time that this is now public, and so we have a Thornwood group, and we have a community playfields group, and what are we telling them they should do in terms of, now that they get a chance to see this and comment on it, what are we telling them? That could be a rhetorical question. But I'm asking it. I don't know that any one person here is going to answer it. But I'd like to know. We should decide what we're telling them. The page 11 of 27. They under here, declaration of default of the park district remedies. In here. Says, I'm about like 7-8 lines down. Park District may send a notice of termination and may require the village to restore the park properties to substantially their original condition through the removal of all at-grade or above-grade improvements and perform any and all necessary measures to stabilize and neutralize all below-grade improvements related to the storage reservoirs. That's a big point. And I raise this because if, having addressed this issue recently with the village at the Women's Club, if they were to take down that building, they had to remove everything underground, all the foundations, everything, and so that the site would be restored to a pristine site, and the next person could develop on it. So this allows the village, if we tell them we're terminating this agreement, they can simply cut everything off at ground level and leave everything in the ground. Again, I consider that to be something worthy of our discussion, subsurface materials being left behind.
Brian, I can actually comment on that.
Sure.
You raised that question to me last week or the week before, and
Sure.
I raised it to our legal counsel. The next paragraph, 10.1A, talks about in the event Park District at any time subsequent determines it is in the best interest of the Park District to use or develop the easement premises or some portion thereof in a manner which requires excavation of all or part of below-grade improvements, village shall be responsible at its sole cost and expense for that portion of the cost of such excavation attributable to the existence and removal of the below-grade improvements, blah, 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 blah. So that's where we have the ability to demand removal.
If we have a use for it. So we're
Correct.
kind of giving up. So let's say we don't have a use for it. We're saying leave it in, and we come up with a use for it later. We've kind of we've shot ourselves. We no longer have that ability. Again, I'm not
If I could just, I
debating.
think it
Go
actually
ahead.
says, just to clarify, I think it actually says, if the Park District at any time subsequent determines. So I don't think there's
Yeah,
a
there's no time
timetable
frame
on
to
that.
it.
If we are protected by that, then that's my point.
Yeah.
I simply wish to make sure that we as landowners, on behalf of the village, of the community, have good, we can use our land.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if I have anything else. I'm going to flip through in the next 10 pages, and I'm sorry to take insurance, yes. This is a minor point, page 15 of 27. In the agreements, we don't just review insurance from time to time. We actually ask that there's an annual certificate of insurance that's provided to us. I'm not going to go down swinging on that one, but the last item is the agreement is actually signed by our president, which represents our board of commissioners, as well as our secretary, and it's signed by the village's village manager, which I thought odd that the village board doesn't actually have a
I agree with
representative.
you. I had that on mine, that the village president is missing his
They-
I would
signature.
think that
They
somehow or
operate
another,
differently.
we got this agreement between us, buddies, right? So, okay. All right, those are my comments, and, I don't know that we're going to resolve any of them here tonight, but I wanted to get them out.
I've got them down.
Thank you.
Thank you. This end of the dais. Todd, do you want to work?
No?
No comments or questions?
No.
Julia?
Some of my questions I raised in another meeting, but I feel, based on the discussion already shared, that they've been captured them. I'm interested in some comments on the plan, so
Okay.
I'll hold those until.
Yep, great.
Thank you.
I just had a couple issues on the agreement, and I'm not sure whether the section that Steve just read addressed this or not, but up front in the recitals and in a couple other areas of the agreement, we talk about in the recitals, it says we talk about the construction, maintenance, and operation of the storage reservoirs is as sort of the scope of the agreement. And we've talked a little bit before, not too much, about, well, this is could be there for a century, and so there's really a responsibility of the village, not only for those three items that were just mentioned, but also for the ultimate either replacement or removal and remediation as well at some point in the future. It may be 100 years from now, but we don't talk about it in the 3 or 4 places where we have the same language throughout the agreement. And I'm not sure that section at the end that you just read, Steve, it covers that or not. And even if it does, we probably will want to be a little clearer with the fact that it's not just the stuff that's happening now that the village is responsible for. It's the stuff that has to happen in the future as well. So and I put that in my email to you last week. The other area I had an issue with was this temporary construction easement is set for basically a 3 or 4 year period. And given that each park has its own timetable, I don't know that I would give a blanket easement to all 3 parks starting at the time that community playfield starts. And I'm not sure that I would have an easement on the early parks all the way till the end when Thornwood's done. So it felt like we were giving them a little bit of, not that they would necessarily take advantage of it, but there's no need for them to have an easement before the park's even getting close to starting or way after it should have been done already. So that was just a comment there. And
Makes sense.
So it would last long enough after the last park construction completes?
right,
Yeah.
but we
It's a
should
per-
still have an easement
A per park
on
period.
community playfield
Sure.
when they're working
Agreed.
on Thornwood,
Yeah,
right?
kind of a rolling.
Yes, exactly.
Rolling
And those were the 2 main. I had one small insurance comment too. We don't have to deal with that here, but those were my 2 issues.
Thank you. I just had a couple of things, and they've kind of already been mentioned, but I'll just ask them anyway. I, like Brian, wondered about putting the parks back together, whether it's going to be sod or seed, and if that's part of our landscaping plan, or if that's something that's needs to be called out in specifically if they need to put the parks back together, how that works. Another question, and it might be in here, but sometimes I get lost in the legal wording, but if something gets damaged, like what if the walkway between Highcrest and the junior high is damaged? I'm sure it's probably in the wording, but I want to make sure that they're responsible.
responsible.
Okay, for all of anything like that. And then my last one was what Brian mentioned as well about, I noticed that there's no place for President Belinsky to sign this document, and I don't know if that's...
Not required.
Okay, that was my last question. Okay. Anything else on this agreement, specific, the agreement, and then we'll move on to the drawings? Okay. Now that that's done, let's move on to the drawings. Since we've only had these since Friday. Not a very long time. It's a good time to ask questions or give any comments to Director Wilson. How about we start down here, since these guys went first last time. Todd?
No, I already asked a question of Director Wilson, and that was that my concern with the manhole covers.
Yeah.
There's 34-foot manhole covers, and that seems rather significant, being that these are playfields, and nice hard surface wouldn't be all that fun for kids to fall on, and so that was my biggest concern.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, the size of the manholes was surprising. A typical manhole is about, 2 feet? These are 4 feet. And
One is 10 feet.
And are they, is that truly necessary for access? The other, and it sounds like that is, according to Director Wilson, going to be reviewed further. And then the other piece of that is, as we think about how we restore these and recognizing that is not yet determined with the landscape plan or the amount that the village would allocate for us toward landscaping, it seemed concerning, because we do hope to use these as fully as possible. So I'd be interested to see how quickly we can get to the next levels of detail and how that times out with our approval of the IGA, recognizing that these are somewhat on concurrent paths, but we won't have definitive answers.
I basically expressed a desire to Director Wilson to see if there's some sort of alternatives that, similar to West Park, that we wouldn't necessarily have disruptions in the flow of the fields. So,
I hate to say this, I forgot one comment earlier on the agreement.
That's
When the West Park agreement, I wasn't part of when it was being built, but I remember comments coming from at least one board member, and I think even from the executive director, that there were issues we felt on our end about the fact that as plans changed after they were already approved and stuff, that they were being changed in ways that didn't necessarily meet with what we would have wanted to have done, but we really had no way of dealing with it at the time. and that was something that we thought we would remedy with this time around, with this agreement. And that was another one of the comments I put in my email on Wednesday.
Sure. I know that Commissioner Abbott definitely shares in that opinion, that they were changed in a way that was less advantageous. We actually specifically have a memo from engineers explaining that it wasn't less advantageous design. It was a more cost-efficient yet same effectiveness design, same level of safety, same level of longevity. Of course, they wrote it for themselves, so take it for what it's worth. But so that's the history on that, and I will definitely ask about the review changes, and I wonder if that's where that 30-day review period is specifically about. But I need to ask the attorney about that.
Yeah, and it may be
too much for you, but
No, you look, and I don't want to take, look, the fine engineers for that, I didn't mean to imply that somehow or another the village engineers are not good engineers or great engineers. I had specific concerns about the change in design, and as Commissioner Anderson has said, we had no remedy. We weren't consulted about the changes. I'm asking here that we be able to review each step of the designs and have approval, and therefore be able to go to the public. And, I don't have a lot to say about their design, unless I do. I don't know.
I suggested that we have somebody sign off on the change orders that go through. If you're changing the project, there's got to be a change order, right? Somebody's got to get paid for whatever the change is.
Or scope.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's an easy way to
And
handle
just make it easy.
Sure.
One signature from somebody who's in the know.
Well, it's
Yeah,
called a
'cause the
scope
nature-
change.
The
and-
truth is, there will be on-site discoveries
Yeah,
that will change.
absolutely.
That is
Yeah.
the nature of construction.
We don't want to slow it down, but at the same time,
Right.
we want to at least know what's happening.
Go ahead, are you done? Because I'll comment on that.
Yeah.
I don't need to see change orders, but it's called a scope change when you change the project's scope, as opposed to when you simply make a change within the scope that you have established. And so if there are scope changes that alter the design, then yes, I would agree. But there could be hundreds of change orders. I don't wish to get, I do them all the time, and it's how you get a job done. So it's not a requirement that I would layer onto this, but I am very interested that the integrity of the design be maintained, and that we are partners in that process. That is my intent.
To your point, I mean, if all of a sudden this is no longer a T and it becomes a Z or a Q or a X or whatever, I think that would be something that we would want to know about. And I'm assuming that Director Wilson would inform us of all and any significant changes.
Well, it's hard to figure out what's significant, what's not significant until you actually see it. They may want to move manhole covers 10 feet.
Well, that's-
may not seem significant, but it might be if it messes up a field, that kind of thing.
That's why you typically clients review each step of the three main design steps, and we maintain it. The first one, the schematic, is you really establish the overall scope, and then the details follow. And we had to change this, and you get a chance to look at that. By the time you're done, you're talking about the screws that are holding things together. So, construction documents from our standpoint probably are not that. We're not that curious about, except, it still looks the same. That would be why I would look at it.
Yeah, it seems like there's a good balance between level of detail and also, the perspective that we are kept in the loop on the changes that are more significant. So there's some balance between that I think Steve can help identify and recommend.
Actually, Director Wilson, I'm curious, this only represents the drawing only represents right around the tank, and I know that we're trying to address the drainage for the whole field. Are there any other sort of drainage things that are in other parts of the field that are not on this drawing?
Yeah, those drawings haven't been created.
Okay.
So those are the estimates that were done last week that our engineers are confirming. Those drawings have yet to be designed.
Just want to
But there
make sure
will
I
be.
understand. Okay.
Yeah.
And my guess is that that'll be something that concurrently we'll want to try to achieve based on this area being dug up and the access to it and things like that, that we'd want to try to put any kind of our drainage in line with what they're doing.
Yeah, where we can to make efficiencies, we're definitely going to do that.
Great. So, okay, back to the drawing,
Back-
sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry,
I
I just want to
apologize.
keep us on track. So back to what Julia was saying, size of the manhole covers, number of them,
Right.
placement.
And also, the idea of early access versus late access, I was interested in the concept that if we start as early as April 6th, and I think that is the goal or the intention, what needs to happen in the next 90 days, or really 60 days to get that in order? That's a tight timeline to confirm the IGA, to confirm the plans, and, so where we need to meet intermittently or make decisions, I'm in favor of that so that we can stay on a timeline that's reasonable, but for both the village, the school district, and for us.
Agreed.
And those are my comments on the plans.
Okay. Gord?
I had no further comments.
Brian? Mike? Sorry.
Sure, I'll jump in. I guess I would start with a positive. It seems like the village has spent a great deal of time considering access onto the site, off of the site, factoring the impact on surrounding residents and the children, and I applaud them for that. Obviously, we have 2 schools here at this site. We have a tremendous amount of very young traffic, and we want to make sure that the kids are safe throughout this process. So I applaud the village and all of the work that they did in terms of that planning and trying to get the construction done as quickly as possible, even if it means going 7 days a week, going extended hours. So that was very positive. That being said, I was appalled when I saw these drawings. I mean, I can't I was shocked. I know that Todd had mentioned 30. It appears to me that maybe there are 3 structures that are existing. I couldn't really tell, but I certainly counted what appeared to be 28 new items at grade, whether they're catch basins or manholes. I had said a minute ago, one is 10 foot. I correct myself, it's actually 12 foot. There are at least 10 that are 4 feet wide. There are others that they're silent on the size. And I can't imagine that we would consider anything even remotely close to this in terms of the obstructions at grade. So I think it's important that we communicate with the village, and again, about what our expectations are, because this is a tight timetable, and it looks like there are 6 catch basins and 22 manholes, again, of different sizes and so on and so forth. And I know that Director Wilson had said that some of these are perhaps to benefit us in some way in terms of some drainage, and so we don't want to lose them completely. I just want to make clear to everyone on this board that I disagree 100%, that I think we do want to lose them completely. That I tried to go over to West Park and see how many of these types of apparatus existed over there. Obviously, there's a fair amount of snow, so I can't see. I wasn't involved in the approval or the planning of that process, so I'm a little bit ignorant, and so there may be some of this that I wasn't aware of, and I certainly want to hear from the village what they do have over at West Park. I also want to say that I probably made some assumptions where I should have asked some questions, and I certainly feel responsible for that. But I assumed that the area above ground would be unimpeded in any way. And so,
That's safe to say.
and so I just want to be clear that I don't want us to give the impression to the village that, hey, if they can, whether it's 28 or 30, if they can knock it down by 10% or 20%, that might somehow be okay. For me personally, the right number is 0. So I want to be very clear about that. And again, I had a conversation with Director Wilson. I'm sure we've all, since we've seen this, and we were all, surprised, to put it mildly. There was some talk about maybe we could put some of these, close to a walkway, or some of them in a place that might not be impactful, at least for what we perceive in the short term. But I think it's important for us to remember that this is going to be here for 100 years, best case scenario. And I don't know if our walkway will be there for 100 years. So putting any of these manholes or catch basins anywhere but at the perimeter of our property, not at the perimeter of the vault, will be unacceptable to me. So I don't know where the rest of the commissioners are on it, but I just wanted to be very clear, because I assume there's going to have to be some pretty significant planning done and pretty significant adjustments, and I don't want to have the village go through multiple iterations where they're trying to figure out where we might be. So I would encourage the rest of the commissioners to speak up on that too. But just for me personally, the correct number is 0. Maybe excluding at the exterior of the property, at the southern edge, for example.
Even at the southern edge, though, it seems like such an extreme number, and I totally agree with everything you're saying. I think that even if we move this to the perimeter, 30 or 28 or whatever that
Right.
seems like a
And there will have to be
huge
some
number.
access points, and if they are at the perimeter, we want to be reasonable, we want to make this work, but again, I was shocked when I saw this. I was utterly shocked. So those are my
Is this like
comments.
the cheapest way of doing it, or are
I
there
have no
other
idea.
ways to do it that are maybe easier but are less or more expensive but
think
accomplish what we're looking for?
I think that's a great question, and what's fascinating is if we were to say the intention is to design underground drainage so that the top can be used for playing fields. This is not what that result would be. This is not the result of that design direction. So it seems that they omitted the idea that these would be used for playing fields in the future, because no engineer would say a good playing field has this many holes.
Well, and I go to the fact that a majority of these say access manholes. They don't say drainage manholes. And so I wonder how necessary do they really need all these access points? And to Mike's point, can there be something in a different location that would give them that access that they need without having all these in the middle of a soccer field or a baseball field or a lacrosse field?
Absolutely.
I assume that the village did not raise any concerns about the manholes. We are the first, or we wouldn't have gotten to this point?
Correct.
Seems contrary to our objectives as an intergovernmental agreement.
Agreed.
And as we look at the speed at which next revisions are coming and the timing of the IGA, I'm not sure the IGA reflects understanding of how we hope to use these, if this is representative of what the plan will be. So what do you need from us?
I think I have it.
And I guess one last comment on this, and I know Brian hasn't had a chance to weigh in, but I do remember our meeting, I believe it was in September, when we did consider the different configurations for vaults in each of the parks, and I think we asked the village if they would prefer a gravity-based system here or a pump-based system, and even though the gravity-based system was more expensive, it was also more reliable, and they said they wanted to go that way. The obvious impact is it covers more of our park, and if it turns out that they're, again, my position is we don't want any of these, but if it turns out that there's a need for some anywhere other than at the perimeter of our property, unfortunately, I believe we have to look at the configuration of the vault, which I understand would, have a dramatic impact on the construction timetable, and I certainly don't want to go there. I'm as committed as everybody else is to try to move this forward, but it can't be in such a way that's going to impact our use of our parks for the next 100 years. Just can't be. So, and then those are my comments. I'm done.
Okay. So first off, except for the cover page, behind there were these other colored pages, and I'm just quickly dispense with those. These are not really, these pages below are not really design drawings. They're more like logistics plans. They also explain the easement, especially construction easements. I don't really have much in the way of comments on these at all. They seem to be well done, but the point I wish to make is that they're not design drawings. So I'm happy somebody's thinking about them, and they seem to be doing a good job of trying to figure out how to get it done, but what will be built is really what we're talking about here. To that end, the only drawing that we have in terms of what this is that we're approving is the front drawing. I have to say, although it shows us a picture of, sort of has a picture of what they're proposing, it isn't really much of a design drawing. For instance, we don't know the elevations. We know that our park has a considerable grade elevation change. I can't tell what the ground cover is. I can't tell what the soils are that are being put back down over it. I can't tell how deep these tanks are. I don't really have information. We do know that they're either out to bid very soon, if early April is when they really intend to start. Something must exist, but
Yeah, there's a
we don't have-
560-page document that shows you all of that. I chose one page that illustrated the overview. I'd be happy to share with you the other 559 pages.
Well, I won't read them all. I hope that's
No, but there's a lot.
summary.
All the things you mentioned, I've seen them in there, elevations and all of that. So if
those
you're
are-
interested, it's
I am
a public
interested.
document. I'm not sharing state secrets, so
Okay.
definitely can pass that along.
Those are questions that I have, and it's in the details. And so, I'm not interested in as I said, the screws that get used and things like that. But I am interested in those kinds of questions because I can't see them here. I do wish to share in fellow commissioners' concerns about the number of these access holes. It is difficult, again, looking at this drawing to understand why so many are necessary. I know that I think it's only like 5 feet inside this thing, so they're cutting down how far they have to walk inside, but these are tripping hazards, pure and simple. Not just tripping hazards. I'm not going to trip over these, but our kids are, so I'm concerned about that. We know, just to say it, there are no pumps in this park, and I know we've said this in the past, but, the drawing doesn't show there's pumps. There's no pumps. This is all gravity, and just want to make sure that, just put that, yes, this is all gravity fed, gravity drained. We are talking about bathrooms. We are talking about walking paths because it's put in the IGA. It would be nice as soon as possible that we know what we're talking about in terms of estimates, and we can get public comment on that. The West Park, you talked about that. I don't believe that within the turf field there's a single access hole. That is a very different tank. That tank goes like 30 feet deep. So, it's the access, I believe, is in that building. There's access, but not within the turf field. So this is as you say, if we're using that as an example, this is not the example. We did not anticipate this number of manholes. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, can you guide us on what timing is next?
Wait, can I just make a couple
of course.
questions? I also agree with what other commissioners have said about the number of manholes and placements, so I won't beat that dead horse. I did have one question on this one drawing. It was the page with the third page in. It says bike path open during early access phase, so I'm assuming that means I'm trying to figure out what that means. I just want to make sure that the path between High Crest and the junior high.
April 6th to June 18th.
Okay.
So until school lets out.
Okay, it's still
available.
open, but then it'll be open again, I'm guessing,
When
once
school starts back.
Okay, that was just my question. I just was wondering about timing there.
So it is gone during the summer.
It'll be
Correct.
gone during the summer, so they won't be able to.
And
but
there's some kind of detour to be provided to safe school walking route.
And Amy, to clarify, I think if you take a look 2 pages past, so there's the early access, there's the main construction, summer construction, and the late access.
Yep.
They're contemplating that bike path would not be available during the late access, potentially. That's what the exhibit CC shows.
Right.
And you have to keep in mind that it's entirely, the reason, I didn't design these or develop these, but it looks like they're contemplating a situation, if construction is still going, they might need to come off of Birchwood Lane,
Come
in
this
which
way.
case there would be trucks crossing that, so it wouldn't be safe for the kids.
Right, so we'd have to figure out some way to have, I know that's a huge thoroughfare for kids getting to the junior high and the middle school, so is there some sort of plan or alternate route that could be put in place so that kids are,
Not through the park, because as you can see, it
right, so they'd have to come
contemplates
down.
property line to property line there.
But again, as I
Yes,
read
yes.
this, it's only if they're not able to get the major construction done
Done
before
by
school
the
starts
school
again.
starts. So that is, I
And
mean, the
they're
plan
trying
is to
keep-
try to do that.
Correct.
Okay. So
That's
just-
how I read them
okay.
anyway. Yeah.
I was just, yeah, I had a question about that. Okay. I think that was pretty much all I wanted to ask on that. So, sorry, go ahead, Julia, you started to say
Yeah.
about timing as far as next steps.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I noticed that the sheets were dated January 9th and 15th, and I just wanted to get a sense of what we can expect next between now and, say, the
Sure.
next board meeting.
So as I said, starting last week, their engineers are working on alternatives. As soon as those become available, I'm sharing them out with all of you. And as you pointed out earlier, if we need to schedule additional
Sure.
meetings,
Happy to be available
we
if we
definitely
need to.
want to try and make that happen.
And what do we
Thank
tell our community in terms of their, we've said we're going to give our community a chance to weigh in on this? I don't have an answer, I'm just asking.
In what respect? I mean,
Well, this is, we've made it clear to the community that we would take comments upon the design, and we would give them an opportunity to react. Now, Thornwood came here, that community group's great, they really organized, and they've been asking us. This isn't Thornwood, but at least, they came and said, so we're going to have a chance to talk about this, and we say yes. Community
I guess-
playfields are less, like, they don't have like an organizing committee that comes and talks to us and asks for it, but
Right.
what do we tell them?
I guess it was my understanding that that would be the time when we're discussing the actual park being put back together and what's going to be above ground, that we would have the community come and give us input on that, as opposed to what's going underneath the ground.
I guess, as a deliberative body, I simply wish to deliberate and give our community a chance to I don't know. I mean, we're going to talk about bathrooms and a running path
Right,
some other
which is
time,
not part
tonight.
of, right, exactly, which is not part of this and wouldn't be part of the agreement or the original documents.
Okay. I simply feel that if somebody wants to say something, they were given
Absolutely.
an opportunity. As we know, people come to us and say, well, I didn't know.
Right.
And
I think that probably the best time to do that would be when we have a discussion on this, any revised drawings or anything moving forward. I mean, anyone is welcome to come to any of our meetings to give us comments or input as we move forward before we would vote on the IGA.
so, should I invite people to come if they wish to make a comment? I'm not trying to orchestrate something, like April? April's a good time to come, and if you
I think
have
we'll have
something.
this signed way before April.
Yeah,
Not
you get-
April.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry,
I'm
it's
getting
not May, it's not
confused.
March now, it is February.
No, it's February. I'm
I
like,
mean,
wait.
this IGA can't address the details of all of the nice things we're going
Right.
to do in the park. It looks like we're going to get, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be dollars allocated, but the detail is, it'll be months before that comes to fruition. And, obviously, it's toward the end, not at the beginning of the project. So I don't want to get people riled up too soon. And, I don't think that's what the intent of the IGA is.
So
I don't want to rile anybody up, period. I simply
Well,
want
we're
to
going
give them the
to, we're
opportunity.
going
just so I understand, just for clarification, the IGA is going to spell out dollar amounts, but for example, and I'm just using this as an easy example, it's our job to then say, hey, I want grass here, and I want flowers here, and I want a tree here for landscaping at a later time, not, we have some discretion on how we do that. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that could be a year from now, how we allocate that and how we design that. So it seems like I don't know what what we'd be deciding now. So that's where I'm getting a little confused.
Well, we are, as I understand it, not necessarily deciding a design here, but we are deciding that we will soon vote on an IGA. And it just simply, if we're going to vote on an IGA, if public wishes to comment on it, don't know why they would, just, we're going to vote on something that, the IGA is now out, they can find it, right? They can comment on it if they wish.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Always.
And do we know when we're going to, vote on this IGA? Probably in March? I'm sorry, I had the months all wrong.
I don't know at this point. I think it's kind of a fluid situation depending on how many iterations of drawings and legal changes in the document. So it's, obviously the intent is to get it done in a prudent manner so that the village can get going in April to start. But we also have to make sure we're all doing our due diligence, and it is what it is. So as Julia mentioned, there might be additional meetings or things like that in the meantime.
Okay. Then the IGA is out, public document, and we are taking public comment on it
website.
now.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Any other comments on the IGA or these drawings? All right, I think we are concluding our new business. And next on our agenda, it says reconvene to regular board meeting, which that I think was a mistake.
Carryover.
Yeah,
Yep.
carryover from our last month. So final thing on there is our adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.